The crate was empty, but Atlas stood before it like something inside was still begging to be found. The first real mission began at 0610 on a wet morning near the military port in North Carolina, where the air smelled of salt water, diesel, old rope, and rain-soaked wood. A low ceiling of gray clouds pressed over the warehouse district, turning the yard outside Building 17 into a mirror of puddles and yellow security lights. Staff Sergeant Caleb Rowe walked through the open loading bay with Atlas at his left side, one hand loose on the lead, the other resting near his field notebook. Caleb was a white U.S. Marine in his 30s, broad-shouldered and quiet, with close-cut brown hair and blue eyes that had learned to watch a room before trusting it. He had spent months training with Atlas, learning the small language of ears, breath, pace, and pause. But training lanes were controlled. The boxes were clean. The instructors expected mistakes. This place did not feel like practice. This place felt like it had already decided what it wanted to hide. Atlas moved with calm precision between rows of military crates, his black and tan coat darkened slightly by mist, his working harness snug across his chest, his amber eyes sweeping from pallet to pallet. He passed medical containers, spare harness cases, sealed tool bins, and stacked canvas bags without giving more than a brief sniff. The inspection team followed 20 feet behind them, boots echoing on concrete, voices low, clipboards ready. It was supposed to be simple. A shipment had been mislabeled. A crate number had gone missing from the manifest. Caleb and Atlas were there to confirm the storage lane, clear the area, and let logistics correct the paperwork before noon. Then Atlas stopped. Not gradually, not uncertainly. One moment he was moving through the aisle with steady purpose, and the next he became still in front of a wooden crate tipped slightly on its side beneath a flickering overhead lamp. The crate had no lid, no contents, no packing straw, just bare boards, dark seams, and a faded stencil number almost rubbed away by old handling marks. Empty. Caleb felt the lead go slack, then heavy. Atlas lowered his head and breathed in through his nose, slow and deep. His ears angled forward. His tail stopped moving. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply lifted one front paw and placed it on the crate's edge, as gently as a hand on a closed door. Caleb gave a quiet command to continue. Atlas did not move. Behind them, someone shifted impatiently. A young corporal whispered that maybe the new K-9 had found a ghost. A soft laugh followed, then died when Caleb turned his head. He looked back at Atlas. The dog's eyes were fixed inside the crate, not wild, not confused, but certain in a way Caleb had come to respect more than any printed order. The warehouse hummed around them. Rain tapped the metal roof. Somewhere outside, a truck backed up with a distant warning beep. Caleb crouched beside the crate and touched the damp wood. Nothing looked wrong. Nothing looked alive. Yet Atlas leaned closer, nose hovering over one dark corner at the bottom, and for one strange second Caleb felt the cold pass through him. The crate was empty, but Atlas was listening to what emptiness had left behind. Nearly 2 hours before Atlas stopped at the empty crate, Caleb Rowe stood in the briefing room with the quiet weight of a man pretending his pulse had not changed. The room was small, windowless, and too bright, with a long table scarred by years of coffee cups, duty folders, and tired hands. A wall clock ticked above a map of the port warehouse district, each second landing harder than it should have. Caleb wore his olive field jacket over a plain duty shirt, sleeves neat, boots still damp from the morning walk across the barracks yard. Atlas sat beside his left knee, calm and straight-backed, his black and tan coat brushed clean, his harness resting on the chair behind them like a promise waiting to be buckled. This was not a training lane. This was not a demonstration for recruits. This was their first real field assignment together, and everybody in the room knew it. Some knew it kindly. Some knew it with doubt. Sergeant Miles, the logistics lead, tapped a folder against the table and explained the task in a flat voice. Building 17. Storage Lane C. One missing crate number. Possible manifest error. Verify, clear, document, and return. No heroics. No delays. The last 2 words were not aimed at the room. They were aimed at Caleb. He accepted them without moving his face. Across the table, a young corporal smirked down at his notes. Not cruel exactly, just young enough to confuse silence with weakness. Someone had already called Atlas untested. Someone else had said a real warehouse was different from a sent course. Caleb had heard all of it. Atlas had heard tone, breath, chair legs, the little shifts people made when they doubted something standing right in front of them. The shepherd did not react. He only looked at Caleb once, amber eyes steady, as if to say that humans often made noise before learning. Caleb reached down and touched 2 fingers to the fur between Atlas's ears. "Easy, buddy," he murmured, not because Atlas needed calming, but because Caleb did. Before they left, Atlas rose and paused near an old gear locker by the briefing room door. It was half open, filled with retired leads, cracked training sleeves, faded patches, and collars no one had logged in months. Atlas leaned in and sniffed one worn leather collar, hanging from a hook near the bottom. His ears shifted forward. Caleb noticed, but Sergeant Miles was already calling the team out to the trucks. Atlas held there 1 second too long, breathing in whatever memory lived in the leather, then followed Caleb without command. Outside, dawn had not fully broken. The base road shone with rain, and the convoy moved toward the port through thin fog and pine shadows. Caleb watched Atlas in the seat beside him, the dog's head lifted, nose working at the cracked window where cold air entered in ribbons. There was no fear in him, no excitement either, only focus. Caleb thought of all the months before this morning, the failed drills, the patient corrections, the late evenings when Atlas would rest his head near Caleb's boot after everyone else had gone. Trust had not arrived all at once. It had been built in inches, by repetition, by waiting, by learning the difference between a dog ignoring a command and a dog hearing something deeper than command could reach. When the trucks reached Building 17, the warehouse looked ordinary from the outside, a long metal structure beside the loading docks, its roll-up doors streaked with rust, its windows yellow with early light. Ordinary things often fooled people. Caleb clipped the lead to Atlas's harness, looked once at the dog, and gave a small nod. Work. Atlas stepped forward into the smell of wet wood, diesel, rope, and old paper, carrying with him the last trace of that forgotten collar from the briefing room. Caleb did not know it yet, but the mission had started before they ever entered the warehouse. Back inside Building 17, the first mistake anyone made was calling Atlas wrong too soon. The German shepherd remained in front of the open crate, one paw resting on the damp wooden edge, his nose lowered toward the dark corner where 2 boards met at an uneven seam. Caleb stayed crouched beside him, letting the warehouse breathe around them. The inspection team gathered behind him in a loose half-circle, boots scraping softly, clipboards held like shields against the possibility that an empty box could matter. Sergeant Miles checked his watch. "Row, we have 14 more storage numbers to verify." Caleb did not look away from Atlas. "Give me 1 minute." The young corporal from the briefing room let out a careful laugh, the kind meant to sound harmless while still cutting. "Maybe he just likes the crate, Sergeant. Maybe it smells like breakfast." A few shoulders shifted. Nobody laughed fully. Not with Caleb's hand resting still on the crate and Atlas silent as a church door. Caleb had learned that true alerts did not always arrive with drama. Sometimes they arrived as refusal. Sometimes they arrived as stillness. He ran his fingers along the inside wall of the crate and felt only rough wood, old moisture, and a faint dusting of grit. Nothing obvious. No hidden package. No equipment tag. No fresh label. Sergeant Miles stepped closer. "It is empty." Caleb finally turned his head. Then why is he treating it like evidence? The sentence settled into the space between them. Atlas lowered his paw and slipped his nose deeper into the corner. His breathing changed, shorter now, focused. Then he lay down. Not tired. Not submissive. Low to the floor, shoulders aligned with the crate opening, eyes fixed on Caleb. That was when Caleb felt the doubt in the room turn its full weight toward him. If he forced Atlas onward, the team would move faster, the paperwork would stay clean, and his first mission would be recorded as uneventful. If he stayed, every second became a note in someone else's report. New handler hesitated. K9 gave possible false alert. Sweep delayed. Caleb heard all of it before anyone said it. He looked into Atlas's amber eyes. There was no confusion there. No apology. Only that quiet certainty a dog carries when it knows a truth humans have not earned yet. Caleb stood and loosened the lead, giving Atlas more room. "Show me," he said softly. Atlas rose at once. He did not bark. He did not scratch wildly. He placed his nose against the lower right corner of the crate, held it there for 3 long seconds, then lifted his head toward the loading dock doors at the far end of the warehouse. Rain tapped the roof in a gentle, uneven rhythm. A forklift beeped outside, muffled by distance. Caleb looked from the crate to the doors, then back again. Sergeant Miles sighed, but something in his expression had changed. Annoyance had not left, but certainty had. Caleb reached into his pocket for a small flashlight and angled the beam into the crate. At first the wood showed only stains and scratches. Then the light caught something near the seam. A thin mark, not from tools or cargo hooks, but from claws. Caleb leaned closer. Beside it, caught under a splinter, was a single strand of black and tan fur. The corporal stopped smiling. Caleb did not touch it yet. He let everyone see it where it was. Atlas stood beside him, breathing quietly, the line of his body aimed toward the loading dock like an arrow. Caleb's voice stayed low. This crate was not empty when it came here. The warehouse seemed to still itself around those words. Sergeant Miles removed his cap, looked once toward the doors, and then at Atlas. What are you saying was inside? Caleb watched Atlas turn his head toward the far end of the building, where a narrow service hallway disappeared behind stacked pallets and a red exit sign flickered weakly above a side door. I do not know yet, Caleb said. But he does. Caleb did not need the whole room to believe him. He only needed enough time for Atlas to finish what he had started. Sergeant Miles sealed the loose strand of black and tan fur in a small evidence pouch, then marked the crate number in his notebook with a slower hand than before. The young corporal stood back now, his earlier smile gone, watching Atlas the way people watch a storm after realizing the clouds were not harmless. The warehouse lights buzzed above them. Rainwater moved through the gutters outside in steady silver threads. Caleb crouched once more and angled his flashlight into the lower right corner of the crate. The claw marks were shallow, but there were several of them, close together, all pointed toward the open side, as if something inside had tried to brace itself during movement. No blood, no torn wood, nothing violent, just signs of fear, pressure, and a body that had not understood why the dark had closed around it. Atlas lowered his nose beside the marks, then drew back and looked toward the loading dock again. Caleb followed the line of his gaze. The wide roll-up door at the far end of Building 17 stood half open, showing a strip of gray morning beyond it. Pallets had been dragged near the threshold. Tire tracks crossed the wet concrete, then vanished into the rain outside. Caleb walked the crate's outer edge, slow and careful, letting the light travel over old nails, shipping stamps, and damp seams. On the underside, half tucked into a crack between two boards, he saw a thin white strip. He used the tip of his pen to ease it free. A piece of medical wrap. Not large. Maybe 3 inches long. White once, now stained with dust and the faint brown of old cardboard. On one edge, written in faded blue ink, were 2 partial words. K9 Recovery. Sergeant Miles stepped closer. That does not belong in a crate marked training pads. Caleb did not answer. He held the strip near Atlas, not touching the dog's nose, just letting the scent rise. Atlas inhaled once, then turned sharply toward the service hallway beneath the flickering red exit sign. His front paws shifted. His body knew the trail before permission arrived. Caleb looked at Miles. I need to follow this. Miles glanced at the manifest, then at the crate, then at Atlas. The conflict in his face was plain. Procedure wanted him to stay with the numbers. Instinct, the older and wiser thing, had begun to lean in the other direction. 5 minutes, Miles said. Caleb nodded. Atlas was already moving. They passed stacked pallets wrapped in cloudy plastic, canvas bags tied with green cord, and old rope that smelled of harbor water. The air changed as they neared the service hallway. Less diesel, more antiseptic, cold metal, wet concrete. Atlas slowed at the doorway and touched his nose to the floor where the main aisle met a narrow passage used by maintenance crews. Caleb saw scuff marks there, not from boots alone, but from something dragged or rolled too quickly. The hallway led to a side loading door with a keypad lock. It should have been secured. Instead, the latch sat slightly out of place, closed but not caught, like someone had shut it in a hurry and trusted no one to check. Atlas pressed his nose to the seam at the bottom of the door. Then he sat. Not a full alert. A question. Caleb opened the door carefully. Damp air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain, grass, and engine exhaust fading toward the outer fence. Outside, A narrow service lane ran behind the warehouse, half hidden from the main loading dock by a row of dumpsters and stacked wooden pallets. Fresh tire marks curved away from the door toward a gravel access path. Caleb stepped out, Atlas beside him, and saw something caught on the chain-link fence 20 yards away. A loose thread of white wrap fluttered in the wind, the same kind as the strip from the crate. Caleb felt the morning narrow around that small piece of cloth. The crate had been empty when they found it, but emptiness had left a trail. Atlas stood at the fence, ears forward, nose lifted into the rain-cooled air. Beyond the wire, the gravel road bent toward the tree line and disappeared from sight. Caleb looked down at him and understood that the mission had changed. They were no longer checking paperwork. They were following a plea that had almost been erased. Caleb did not take the trail beyond the fence alone. He knew better than to let urgency make him careless. And he knew Atlas deserved more than a rushed guess wrapped in good intentions. Sergeant Miles called the find back to base security, and within 20 minutes the small strip of medical wrap, the fur, and the crate markings were carried to the veterinary clinic under Dr. Hannah Vale's care. The clinic sat on the east side of the base, low and clean beneath a line of wind-bent pines, its windows glowing warm against the gray morning. Inside, the sharp smell of antiseptic met the softer scent of towels, dog food, and old rubber mats. Hannah stood at the exam counter with her sleeves rolled up and her dark hair tied back, studying the evidence with the kind of stillness that made Caleb trust her before she spoke. Atlas sat beside Caleb's boot, but when Hannah placed the fur under a small examination light, his ears rose. "That is German Shepherd," she said quietly. Caleb already knew, but the words changed the air. Hannah lifted the medical wrap with tweezers and turned it toward the light. K9 Recovery. She read the partial mark twice, as if hoping the second time would make it less troubling. Then she opened the clinic database and typed in the crate number Sergeant Miles had copied from the faded stencil. The computer fan hummed. Rain tapped the window. The room seemed to wait with them. At first, nothing appeared. Then Hannah tried the last 4 digits only, and an older archive file opened. Her face changed. Caleb saw it before she said the name. Ranger. Atlas stood so suddenly the lead clicked against the metal leg of the chair. His body did not tense with alarm. It leaned forward with recognition. Hannah looked from the screen to the dog. "You know that name, do you not?" Caleb rested a hand on Atlas's shoulder, feeling the muscle tremble beneath the fur. Ranger had trained near Atlas during a cold weather rotation 6 months earlier. Older shepherd, silver muzzle, calm as Sunday morning. Atlas followed him everywhere for 2 weeks. Hannah swallowed and turned the monitor slightly so Caleb could see. Ranger had been listed as transferred after a minor medical hold. Same warehouse district. Same contractor route. A crate number close enough to be family. The file ended with a relocation note, but no intake record from the receiving facility. Caleb read the blank space where an answer should have been. It felt louder than a shout. Hannah clicked through 2 more linked entries, each one thinner than the last, each one polished by language that made absence sound administrative. Training equipment. Temporary hold. Recovery transport. Caleb looked down at the white strip on the tray. It no longer felt like evidence. It felt like a message that had survived rain, wood, and time because something in the world refused to let it disappear. Atlas stepped closer to the counter and placed his nose beneath the edge of the tray, not touching, only breathing. Then he turned toward the clinic door. Caleb followed his gaze through the glass panel to the service road outside. Beyond it, beyond the fence line and the wet pines, the gravel road from Building 17 curved toward the county side, where old warehouses and abandoned animal facilities sat in the lowlands near the river. Hannah printed the file, sealed the wrap, and reached for her jacket. Caleb looked at her. "You are coming?" She met his eyes. "If Ranger is connected to this, I should have asked more questions 6 months ago." Her voice did not break, but the hurt underneath it was clean and honest. Caleb clipped Atlas's lead back into place. The shepherd stood ready, eyes bright, nose lifted toward the world beyond the clinic walls. For the first time that morning, Caleb understood that the empty crate was not the mystery. It was the beginning of an apology. By sunset, the rain had softened into a silver mist, and the gravel road beyond Building 17 looked almost innocent. Caleb moved along the fence line with Atlas at his side and Dr. Hannah Vale a few steps behind, her field bag slung across one shoulder, the sealed copy of Ranger's archived file tucked safely inside. Sergeant Miles had stayed back to secure the warehouse and report the crate as evidence, but Caleb could feel the man's doubt changing into something quieter, something close to belief. The service gate opened onto a county access road that ran behind the military port, past drainage ditches, pine scrub, and old storage buildings with tin roofs dulled by salt air. Atlas took the lead without pulling, nose low, body careful. The scent was old in places, washed thin by rain, but it was still there for him, held in gravel, grass, rusted fence posts, and the white threads of medical wrap snagged along the way. Caleb let him work. He had learned that a good handler did not drag truth forward. He followed it. The road curved for nearly a mile before the base lights faded behind them, and the land opened into a neglected stretch of low country near the river. A wooden sign leaned at an angle beside a narrow driveway, its paint peeled by weather until only a few letters remained. Hannah stopped when she saw it. "This used to be a rescue facility," she said. "It closed last year after funding fell through." Caleb looked down the driveway. Weeds grew through the cracked asphalt. Rainwater filled shallow potholes. At the far end stood a low brick building with boarded windows, a sagging awning, and one side door that had not been shut all the way. No fresh voices. No movement. Just the smell of wet leaves, old cleaning solution, and a quietness that felt too deliberate. Atlas paused at the entrance to the driveway. His ears shifted forward, then eased back. Not fear. Recognition. Caleb loosened the lead by a few inches. Easy. The shepherd walked slowly now, not with the confident pace of a search, but with the gentleness of approaching something wounded. That change told Caleb more than a bark could have. They reached the side door as the first evening insects began to sing from the ditch grass. Hannah pulled a small flashlight from her bag. Caleb pushed the door open with 2 fingers. It gave a soft groan and revealed a narrow hallway lined with empty rooms. Dust moved in the beam of light. Old kennels stood open, their gates resting against walls. A stainless steel bowl lay upside down near the far corner. The place had been abandoned, but not untouched. Atlas moved past the first 2 rooms without stopping. At the third, he froze. The air inside smelled faintly of antiseptic, damp blanket, and dog. Caleb felt his own breath slow. Atlas stepped through the doorway and lowered his head. In the back of the room, beneath a folded gray blanket, something stirred. Hannah moved beside Caleb, careful and quiet. The flashlight beam softened over a German shepherd with a silver muzzle and tired eyes, thin but alive, watching them from the blanket as if he had forgotten whether help could be trusted. Atlas did not rush him. He lay down 5 feet away, making himself small, his amber eyes gentle now. The older dog lifted his head a fraction. On his faded collar, barely visible beneath worn fur, was the name Caleb already knew. Ranger. Hannah covered her mouth, and Caleb felt a hard ache open behind his ribs. The empty crate had not led them to a theory. It had led them to a living soul. Atlas stretched his nose forward across the dusty floor, slow as a prayer. Ranger answered with one weak breath and touched his muzzle to Atlas's. For a long moment, no one moved. The old room seemed to hold its breath around the 2 shepherds, one strong and one weary, their noses touching across the dusty floor like a promise reaching through time. Caleb lowered himself slowly to one knee, keeping his hands visible, his voice soft enough not to disturb the fragile trust forming in the corner. "Ranger," he said. The older German shepherd blinked at the sound of his name. His ears tried to rise, but only one made it halfway. Hannah stepped in carefully, setting her field bag down without a sound. She did not rush toward him. She knew fear could live in a body long after danger had left the room. "Hey, sweet boy," she whispered. "We are going to help you." Atlas stayed low, his tail still, his breathing calm. He was not acting like a search dog now. He was acting like a friend who had found someone missing from the world. Ranger's coat had lost some of its shine, and his frame looked thinner than it should have, but his eyes were clear enough to recognize kindness when it finally returned. Hannah opened a small pouch and took out a collapsible bowl, then poured water from a bottle in a slow stream. The sound made Ranger lift his head a little higher. Caleb held his breath as the older dog leaned forward and drank. Not much, just enough. But sometimes enough is the first miracle. Outside, evening rain whispered against the boarded windows. Caleb radioed Sergeant Miles with their location, requesting veterinary transport and base security support, his words measured though his chest felt tight. He did not accuse anyone. He did not turn the moment into noise. The proof was lying on a gray blanket with a faded collar and a name that had been missing for 6 months. Hannah checked Ranger from a careful distance first, speaking to him as if each word were a hand held out. His temperature was low, but stable. His breathing was tired, but steady. No panic, no fight, just exhaustion, hunger, and the long confusion of a loyal animal who had waited too long for the right door to open. Caleb noticed the corner of a crate tag beneath the blanket, the same faded numbering system from Building 17. He eased it free and saw enough to understand. Ranger had not disappeared into paperwork. He had been moved, mislabeled, and forgotten by people who thought silence was the same as absence. Atlas watched Caleb pick up the tag, then shifted closer to Ranger, placing his body like a quiet wall between the older dog and the open hallway. It was protective, but gentle. Ranger rested his chin back down and closed his eyes, not from giving up, but from relief. Within 20 minutes, headlights washed across the broken windows. Sergeant Miles arrived with 2 security personnel and a soft stretcher from the clinic van. No one spoke loudly. No one made sudden moves. Hannah guided the process, her voice calm, her hands steady. Atlas stood beside Ranger the whole time, stepping only when Caleb asked, never taking his eyes off the dog he had led them to. As they carried Ranger into the misty evening, the abandoned facility looked less like a place of loss and more like a place where loss had finally been interrupted. Caleb walked behind the stretcher with Atlas at his side, the crate tag sealed in his pocket, the weight of the day settling into something deeper than pride. This had been their first mission. Not a clean sweep. Not a simple report. Not the easy kind of success command like to measure. It had been a lesson written in fur, rain, old wood, and one empty crate that refused to stay empty. At the clinic, Hannah prepared a warm bed and set Ranger beneath a heat lamp, wrapping him in clean blankets while Atlas lay just outside the exam room door. Caleb sat beside him on the floor, one hand resting between his ears. Through the glass, Ranger opened his eyes once and looked toward Atlas. The younger shepherd lifted his head. No bark, no command, just recognition. Caleb felt the quiet truth of it settle over him. Some missions do not begin when orders are given. They begin when one loyal heart hears another still calling. By midnight, the veterinary clinic had become the quietest place on base, and yet it felt like the center of everything. Outside, Camp Lejeune slept under a thin veil of mist, its roads shining beneath security lights, its flag hanging still in the damp coastal air. Inside, the only sounds were the hum of the heat lamp, the soft rhythm of Ranger's breathing, and the occasional shift of Atlas's paws against the clean tile floor. Caleb sat against the wall beside the exam room door, his field jacket folded beneath one elbow, one hand resting on Atlas's shoulders. He had meant to stay only until Hannah finished the first assessment. Then 1 hour became 2. 2 became the deep part of night, when even strong men stop pretending they are not tired. Dr. Hannah Vale moved in and out of the room with quiet purpose, checking fluids, warming blankets, writing notes, and speaking to Ranger in a voice gentle enough to make the old shepherd blink, as if remembering what care sounded like. Sergeant Miles returned near 0100 with a printed update from base security. The abandoned facility had been secured. The crate records were being reviewed. The contractor route tied to Ranger's transfer had been suspended pending investigation. Miles stood in the hallway for a long moment, cap in hand. Looking through the glass at the dog, everyone had stopped looking for too soon. "I owe you an apology," he said. Caleb looked up, eyes heavy but clear. "Not me." Miles followed his gaze to Atlas. The German shepherd lay with his head on his paws, eyes fixed on the exam room. Miles crouched slightly, awkward in the way proud men become when humility arrives late, but honestly. "I should have trusted the dog." Caleb rubbed Atlas's fur with his thumb. He was not asking for trust. He was showing us where to look. The words settled softly between them. Miles nodded and left without adding anything else. Some apologies are better when they do not try to defend themselves. Near dawn, Ranger stirred beneath the warm blankets. His silver muzzle lifted a few inches, and Hannah paused beside him, one hand hovering but not forcing comfort. Atlas stood instantly. Caleb rose with him, every sore muscle suddenly awake. Through the glass, Ranger turned his head toward the door. His eyes found Atlas. The younger shepherd gave one quiet whine, barely more than breath. Hannah opened the door a few inches. "Easy," she whispered. Atlas stepped inside slowly, lowering his body as he crossed the tile. No excitement. No sudden greeting. Just reverence. Ranger watched him come closer, and when Atlas reached the edge of the blanket, the old dog lifted his nose. They touched muzzle to muzzle again, and this time Ranger's tail moved once beneath the blanket. Once. Small. Trembling. Enough to make Hannah turn away for a second and press the back of her wrist to her eye. Caleb stood in the doorway and felt something inside him release. His first real mission with Atlas had not ended with a clean report or a simple clearance. It had ended here, in a clinic washed in blue morning light, with one dog reminding another that he had not vanished from the world. Later, Colonel Everett Shaw arrived before sunrise, quiet and grave, reading the first findings with the expression of a man realizing that paperwork had covered a living absence. He looked at Caleb, then at Atlas, then through the glass at Ranger. "You followed the K9 when the manifest said there was nothing there," he said. Caleb shook his head gently. Atlas followed what was left behind. Shaw considered that, then gave a slow nod. "Then that is the mission report." Caleb looked down at Atlas, whose eyes had not moved from Ranger. No medal could have made the moment larger. No speech could have made it cleaner. A soldier, a dog, an empty crate, and a name restored to the living. That was enough. As the first pale light touched the clinic windows, Caleb understood what the field had taught him in one long day. A mission is not real because command names it so. It becomes real when someone chooses not to walk past the quietest signal in the room. By mid-morning, the rain had finally moved east, leaving Camp Lejeune washed clean beneath a soft Carolina sun. The warehouse team returned to Building 17, but Caleb did not go with them right away. He stood outside the veterinary clinic with Atlas at his side, watching the light gather on the wet grass and the quiet road beyond the pines. Behind the clinic windows, Ranger slept in a warm room with clean blankets, fresh water, and Hannah Vale checking on him every few minutes as if she were making up for every question no one had asked before. The empty crate had been moved to evidence storage, its faded number photographed, it seemed sealed, its small claw marks preserved. But Caleb could not think of it as empty anymore. It had carried fear. It had carried a scent. It had carried the first honest word of a dog nobody believed was still out there. Sergeant Miles crossed the lawn with his cap in one hand and a folded report in the other. He stopped near Caleb and looked down at Atlas, whose ears lifted but whose body stayed calm. "The report says the K9 alert changed the course of the mission," Miles said. Caleb gave a faint smile. "That is one way to write it." Miles looked toward the clinic window, where Ranger's silver muzzle could just barely be seen above the blanket. "The better way is that he saved us from walking past the truth." Caleb did not answer, because some sentences deserve room to settle. A few hours later, Colonel Shaw authorized Atlas to return to regular duty with Caleb, effective immediately, and opened a full review of the contractor route tied to Ranger's disappearance. There was no ceremony, no applause, just a signed page, a cleared hallway, and Hannah stepping out of the clinic with tired eyes and a small smile. "Ranger is resting," she said. He lifted his head when Atlas passed the door. Caleb looked down. "You hear that, buddy?" Atlas looked toward the clinic, then back at Caleb, as if torn between duty and devotion. Caleb knelt and unfastened the lead from the harness for a moment, letting the dog stand free in the sunlight. Atlas did not run. He walked to the clinic door and sat outside it, tall and quiet, keeping watch over the friend he had refused to leave in the past. Caleb stood behind him, one hand resting gently between his ears. The base moved around them in ordinary ways. Trucks rolled by. Boots crossed pavement. Radios crackled in the distance. Life resumed, as it always does after Grace visits quietly and leaves people changed. Later, when Caleb and Atlas finally walked back toward the training field, they passed the route that led to Building 17. The warehouse doors were open, bright with daylight now, no longer hiding in shadow. Caleb thought about the first command he had given that morning, the simple word to work, and how Atlas had obeyed it better than anyone understood. He had worked through doubt, through laughter, through rain, through the silence of an empty crate. He had found what paperwork lost, He had heard what people forgot to listen for. At the edge of the field, Atlas paused and looked back once toward the clinic. Caleb waited with him. No hurry, no correction. The shepherd took one long breath, then turned forward again. Together they stepped into the sunlit grass, not as a handler and a dog trying to prove themselves, but as partners who had learned the shape of trust on their very first mission. Some beginnings arrive with noise. Others arrive in a quiet warehouse, before an empty crate, when one loyal heart stops moving and teaches another how to listen.